Hi, I'm Clara, and this is the Practice with Clara podcast, where we go into yoga philosophy and how it makes your life better. Subscribe to the podcast. Hello, and welcome back to Practice with Clara podcast. I'm Clara, and I'm here with my lovely right-hand woman / cohort, Stephanie Trembath, and we are bringing back the podcast every so often. Today, we're going to talk about Shadow School. Shadow School is a 30-day challenge that we just launched here on the Practice with Clara app. And we wanted to do a little podcast about it because we have a lot of passion about this subject. And we thought we should break it down and also just geek out on it because this is what Steph and I do. And we wanted to share it with you. Yeah? Steph, do you have anything you want to share about Shadow School before we get right into it?
I feel like, at least from my own practice and a lot of what I've been reading, talks about bringing forward all of the archetypes that we have. So this challenge really for me, like just the last probably 3 months, kind of surfacing everything that I've been sitting with feels really special and also cool that I get to talk about it with people because it's stuff I've been journaling about and reading about. So it's great that we can come together as community and practice and talk about it together, like share our own experiences of what darkness is.
Great. That's a good segue into, I thought that we should define in our own words, what is Shadow School?
Okay.
And I'll go first so that you can think about it because we're doing this on the fly as per usual. Shadow School. So a little bit of the history or background about Shadow School is I bought a book by Rob Bresney, who writes Free Will Astrology, and astrology I've probably been reading since the 90s. It's syndicated, and I used to read it in the Village Voice in New York, but he's originally from San Francisco. He has a great book called Pronoia, which is the opposite of paranoia. Paranoia being that the universe is out to get you, and pronoia is the concept of the universe conspiring to help you. Within that book, he has a wonderful chapter called Shadow School. And essentially, it's a lot of quotes from Carl Jung as well as other psychologists. And it essentially talks about what some would call the subconscious or the unconscious, depending upon who you speak to. And it's the aspects of ourselves that are not readily available or seen. And essentially, it's usually the emotions or the experiences that we've had that we that have affected us. I wouldn't say in a negative way, but have affected us in a way that has changed us. And when we either start on the path of self-inquiry, whether that be through meditation, through yoga, through therapy, right? Or any art therapy, somatic healing, any kind of healing journey generally, we start to kind of unpack these experiences or these parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily share with the world right off the bat, or that we sit with or inquire about on a day-to-day basis. So what we're exploring, or my intention for this month is, and I think I have to say that I think we've been in Shadow School since the pandemic started a year and a half ago, because we've been at home and not been able to do very much. So I find that, at least in my own experience, as well as the people that I've been talking to, Steph being one of them, is a lot of parts of ourselves that we haven't necessarily unpacked or examined have been showing up. And so we wanted to do a month, the condensed version of that, so that we can kind of just dive a bit deeper, as Steph said, as a community, so that we can explore it together and perhaps ask some uncomfortable questions.
And relate to each other. Because I find for myself, like sometimes what I'm feeling, I don't value it until I get external validation. Like once I read it and an author puts it into a language that I'm like, oh, that's how I feel. Or I have a conversation with someone and I'm like, oh, I have that too. That's really reassuring to be like, I'm not alone in my anxiety or shame or just confusion in some of the stuff that's come up in my personal life and together as a global community with what I've been witnessing in my community like at home in my local spaces, but also online. So to have that validation is really reassuring. Like, we're not alone in how we're feeling, but especially in COVID, like I live by myself, you can feel alone. And so like yoga and these practices that I cherish are that little reminder that even when I feel alone, I'm not. Other people are going through the same thing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Way to go on tying that together. Yeah. So may we together for this month kind of unpack and remember that we, even in our little pods, are not alone.
No.
Especially in going through these bigger emotions. And I feel like the first one I thought we could dive into, and then I'll hand it over to you in terms of direction. But anxiety, I think, is a big one.
Yes.
It's been, at least for me, I'll just say, I think 3 weeks after we went into lockdown, which was like April of last year, I gave birth to my daughter. And so just being a new mom, no sleep, and COVID, I have to say that I've never experienced the amount of anxiety that I've experienced in my life as I did last year. And so how that showed up for me, or how that manifested for me, is definitely not sleeping, and always having a fear of the unknown, like fear of what could happen. And so anticipating not crisis, but anticipating things that could happen that have not happened yet. And so because of that, I was like essentially on hypervigilance. I was like in fight or flight for, I would say, 6 straight months, just hypervigilant about what could happen. And so because of that, my body was like super contracted, like my digestion was totally off. I wasn't sleeping. I like started grinding my teeth again, or clenching my jaw. I used to do that. I had anxiety, actually pretty bad anxiety, in my early 20s before I found yoga. And so that was showing up for me. And then not being able to connect with my community was like, so the isolation mixed with the anxiety was like super intense. And so I ask you, Steph, like in terms of anxiety, like what did that look like for you, or how did it show up? Or
so I in terms of anxiety, the way I've read about it and think of it is like fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm a freezer. Like I totally withdraw. I can get a little bit manic in terms of energetically how I'm moving through things. Like I withdraw from people because I'm an internalizer. And then I also get manic where I feel like I'm stuck on the roof and don't know how to get down. And like my sleeping gets all messed up. My eating rhythms get super, I feel really disconnected from how to nourish myself.
Yeah.
And especially last year, shifting into 2021, there was about 3 months that I felt I was in manic mode. I wasn't talking to a lot of people. It was in the darker months from like January to March. And I found Marion Woodman, who's one of the authors I want to talk about. And she talks a lot about anxiety through different archetypes that we need to surface and embrace. And the other thing I love about Marion Woodman is her speaking to the body as a vessel, and how movement, literally, like you, Clara, like the alchemy of shifting our body is going to release how we feel. And you have to do it to feel it, like with the yoga practice. Like I can think about yoga, but until I get into like a pigeon pose and get into my hips, like things are going to surface that you don't even know are there. So what happened for me, I guess, last year was I wasn't practicing regularly. When I was coming into it with the community, I was thinking about work, and that's my mania coming up. And what did I do? I read, like reconnecting to writing,
same.
Laying on the ground and just breathing and reading. Like Vata energy, I need to come down and ground, eating lentils, eating oats.
Lots of grounding food.
Yeah, things that nourish me and bring my energy down. So that's how anxiety shows up for me. And the freeze mode is just like freezing people out, not reaching out and asking for support. And so now we're kind of opening a little bit, but back then I started setting up weekly Zoom calls with people, like my Write Club women. We meet every Thursday night, and sometimes we don't even write, we just talk for an hour. So like having touch points with people where you're like getting into it, to remind ourselves that like, we're not alone, and also just the different perspectives. Because I find also with kind of the manic mode I get in is like my perspective shrinks, and you can start thinking weird things where like, oh, the world's against me, or like I'm so bad at this. When you kind of start breaking out of the layers and talking to other people, you realize like the illusion that you've painted. You've literally like told yourself a narrative that isn't even happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
What you touched on that I really resonate with, and that we've also put to the group is same thing happened for me is reading really got me out of it. Because I was practicing ish, but I was so tired that it was like actually really hard for me to get on my mat and do anything besides rolling around and being on a bolster, to be perfectly honest, because I was just so physically exhausted from lack of sleep, that I started. I've been reading a lot actually since I had my child. But last winter, like probably in December, I read Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and from there I went back into self-help book, quote unquote self-help books. Like I hadn't read them in a while. I've been reading actually a lot of fiction, but I would say like 3 or 4 months after that, all I read was nonfiction / self-help. If you like look at my Kindle history, it's like I went from there to like Brene Brown to Catherine May, who wrote Wintering, which I think is a wonderful book. So I found, and it's like, this is something that I think Steph and I would agree that this is where we kind of anchor in to help, is like start reading words of wisdom from somebody else, or read books where you're like, oh yes, I am not alone in the way that I am feeling. And so books. So because of that, we've created a resource page that includes, Steph, we actually started, the first list that Steph brought to me initially was about 40 books, which is awesome. And then I was like, maybe we shouldn't overwhelm people and we should just have 12 books for this first one, but we are going to actually create a much larger resource page that we're working on right now to share all the books that we adore all over the realm. So that is coming. But definitely, for me, it was Glennon Doyle's Untamed. And that book doesn't necessarily, I didn't read anything new in it, but I loved the way she writes in the first, it's essentially her experience. She's a blogger that became like, that started writing books. And so it has that feeling of blogging. So it feels very accessible, and I felt like it was speaking directly to me. But I'd love you to maybe share a little bit more about Woodman. Marion Woodman.
So Marion Woodman is a Canadian author who bases her analysis off of Jungian psychology. And she takes it through a feminist lens in that, like, she doesn't harp on the patriarchy, but she is talking about how the patriarchal landscape, we're not expressing our feminine energy, and how this harms, like it wounds our spirits as women and men when we're not embracing both energies. And then how women who take on more masculine energy and men who are either abusing their masculine energy or also haven't awakened the feminine within them. And just to kind of sidebar for a moment, my sister, who is a psych nurse, talks about this all the time in terms of what she perceives in the hospitals she works in. And to me, like when we're talking, she's like, feminine energy is expressed in terms of slowness and beauty and appreciating simplicity. And it can be something simple like wearing more color or embracing nature, like these things. But because I can get wrapped up in very linear processes, like this is my goal, then these are the things I'm pointing at. So this is how I came to Marion Woodman, and it's called The Addiction to Perfection. She has a number of books. This book is about perfectionism. And reading it cracked me open in so many ways, because it's about women who struggle with perfection, and it touches their careers, their relationships, how they nourish themselves. And this, I can't go into this really deep, but this is one of the things that I learned and I loved it. So she speaks a lot of archetypes. That's Jung coming forward. And she talks about Medusa, the eye of Medusa. Because the thing with Medusa is that she is not embracing her feminine energy. So she freezes people and turns them into stone. So men cannot approach her. Whereas Athena is like this beautiful goddess.
So these are Greek goddesses.
These are Greek goddesses. So Athena would be like a Lakshmi.
Athena, no, she's the warrior, so she's more like Durga.
Durga.
Yeah.
But she's still feminine. She's in her power, but she's still very feminine.
We can be a feminine warrior.
Yes. So, yeah, she goes Greek goddesses.
Yeah.
So the energy wants to move clockwise. It wants to go moving to the right. Okay. And that's an energy that's always cycling. And I think about this in terms of like the vayus, the different cycles that energy moves through. A woman I'm speaking to who's a Japanese acupuncturist was telling me, and again, I'm paraphrasing here because I'm not the expert, but about how energy is tied to the elements and energy always has direction. So Marion Woodman links the Medusa energy. It starts to go left. It's going counterintuitively to the flow.
And so what does that look like in terms of us? Like,
so when you're moving, so being in flow is honoring like the rhythms of your body.
Okay.
So in terms of the food you're eating, the activities you're doing, opening to all the sensations, opening to all the different archetypes. So like if you're feeling mad, express it. That would be moving in the circle that's going to the right.
That would be going with the flow.
It would be going with the flow.
Yes.
Whereas going to the left, Medusa, think of like that freeze, right? She's turning people into stone. Same thing with anxiety, fight, flight, freeze. You're resisting the flow, the direction of energy that is coming to you. So again, there's more in this book in terms of that, but what I love about it, because it touches on everything that I've studied, I practice, and things from my teachers with Ayurveda, acupuncture, yoga, it's giving energy direction that moves through the cycle of whatever it is you're going through. Mm-hmm. So bringing it to shadow school, it's like, okay, fear, anger, all these different these uncomfortable things we experience. You want to be the goddess. It's moving through it, keeping things cycling, growing, like think of the seasons, nature, right? It goes through cycles, and not Medusa where you're freezing people out. And that to me is like the anxiety that I was experiencing, where I'm locking people out. I'm going in. I knew I was going backwards. Like another way mania shows up for me is I start sweeping and cleaning a lot. It's like I want to like purge the room because inside I feel dirty or something, you know?
Yeah, or uncomfortable.
And sweeping's moving energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that went in a big circle. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. And so I love this idea of going with the flow. And so I'm just going to touch upon another book that we're recommending for this month is Myth of Freedom by Chogyam Trungpa, which is a Tibetan Buddhist meditation teacher or Tibetan Buddhist teacher. And what he talks a lot about in his book, this is what it's bringing up, is that when we sit meditation, for him specifically, but what I would say, whenever you start doing the self-inquiry work, right, the shadow starts to come up, and how we're defining shadow, and Steph is kind of saying it in terms of emotions or experiences that we don't necessarily pay attention to or want to sit with for too long. He talks about essentially the different kinds of ghosts that arise within us, like the hungry ghost, the greedy ghost, those kinds of things. And those are the aspects of ourselves, I would say, the shadow part, and how we need to essentially and welcome them in. So when those emotions come up, instead of suppressing them or, as you were saying, suppressing in terms of the freezing, but also what can happen for some other people is that they just go with it. Anger being a wonderful example of that is anger is a beautiful, beautiful energy. I can't remember. I think it's Daniel Odier, and also definitely Trungpa had talked about this, but how anger is pure Shakti. It's pure energy. Right? It's actually pure feminine energy that if it's harnessed properly can really, really create. And I'm going to kind of build on what you were saying in terms of the energy. Like if you go with the flow of the anger, and what that would look like is inquiring where or why this energy is showing up. And so I'm speaking directly to that because anger is an emotion that I actually love. And when I was younger, how I would just let it run the show. So I used to lash out at people and kind of move in that direction, because one of the gifts of anger is that it makes you feel like you're in control. But generally it is Band-Aid. It's the first layer of what you're really feeling is what I'm going to say. And generally it's hurt or injustice or something is deeper. And so when anger shows up, Trungpa talks about this, is then to acquire like what is below the anger, because the anger is telling you, hey, pay attention, but what am I paying attention to? And so this is the gift of shadow school, or the gift of self-inquiry, is like, now I'm like, oh, I feel this anger. And then I'm like, okay, where do I feel this in my body? And like, what's below the anger? And so with that, what I have found now, when I'm in a good place, and what I mean by in a good place, meaning that I'm connected to myself, when that anger arises, I step back and I'm like, oh, I'm angry. And then to the best of my ability, if I can, I step out of the situation so that I can inquire, like, well, what am I really feeling right now? Because I find if I just sit with the anger, I'm not able to break down what it is that I'm feeling.
Yes.
And so because of that, I'm actually not getting to the root of what needs to happen. And what it needs to happen generally is an action of some sort. Like, I need to either, my truth is not being spoken. Yes. I feel like there's an injustice that's happening. This is, I'll just speak in my own experience. I'm feeling violated in some way, shape, or form, in terms of not being heard or not being seen. And so when I'm able to step back, I kind of ask myself, like, what do I need in this moment? Or like, what's really happening? And so that is the gift of this inquiry. And then from there, when I'm able to create that understanding, then I can come back either to the situation or person and be like, this is what's going on. Like, this is how I'm feeling, or what have you. And because I don't have the charge of that Shakti to like run me forward, I'm able to speak to what my dad likes to call, like, my Buddha nature is able to speak to the other person's Buddha nature. And what that means is the purity within us that doesn't, that is untouched essentially by a charge, is the way that I think I'm going to describe that. And so moving back in terms of energy is like, can I flow with that anger to teach me what's going on without throwing it at other people, or without essentially without being Medusa, because I can definitely get down with Medusa.
And we all are Medusa. Like, this is the thing with archetype work. We all have these pieces in us. It's like so to speak specifically to shadow school, because it's what I was thinking as you were talking, because I was like, oh yeah, like, what is my experience? How am I moving through this? So one of the things, so shadow school is essential. I'm just going to share so shadow school is 30 days of yoga. It's 7 classes that repeat each week. So you get 4 classes where you work through the same emotion. Okay. I've been doing these classes for the month because we were building the month of yoga. And what I love about this experience, and your medium can be yoga, it can be whatever you want it to be, but when you create a container to explore some of the more disruptive emotions, it's like Clara is saying, you're in a space where you can process with whatever's happening in solitude or wherever you are, as opposed to lashing out at people. And for me, like, the 2 of the emotions that have really come up for me in the last month as I've worked through these classes is anger and shame. And we have grief, we have attachment, illusion, but shame and anger were the 2 that were really resonating for me. And it was beautiful because I had 30 minutes to kind of cycle through the movement, and, you're releasing things, things are coming up. And then at the end, when I was sitting in meditation or journaling, or I'd be like showering later, things come to you. If you're ready for it, catch it if you can. Where I was reflecting on moments from years ago, like, oh, that was my experience of shame. Mm-hmm. And then how is that working through my life now? Like, I had a moment in the shower the other day where there was a moment from high school with my friends, grade 11, where I was shamed by my peers. And it came to me and I started crying, and I was like, wow, I've let that moment dictate some of my present experiences, but I'd never known. So this is like that shadow revealing itself. And I personally feel it's because I've created a container to receive these moments by meditating on whatever it is we're working through that day. So it doesn't need to be yoga. It can be whatever you want it to be. And I'm not going back and saying like, oh, these people were bad. Like, everyone, I like to think, is doing the best that they can in that moment. So it's like, okay, how am I learning and moving forward with more clarity and compassion for myself and others? Yeah.
Oh. I'm just letting that sit.
Yeah.
We are all doing the best that we can. I love that.
And I think we all need containers where we're setting up practices to move through our shit, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
So we're not throwing it at people, because it's easy to be that person when you're tired or hungry or hurting.
The hangry.
Yo, I'm that person when I'm hungry. I get so irritated so quickly. So to just be mindful and have a container that you can work through it. That's why Shadow School, I'm excited. Like, I've already been in it for a month and we're doing it again. So I'm like, oh, what else? Like, what other things are going to be revealed? And I think it's more than just the container of Shadow School. It's also like, here we are again in round 2 of, with COVID.
Yeah, like this, really like round 3.5.
Yeah, but like it's our second fall, so.
Oh yeah, I see.
Right?
Yes.
This season, we're coming back around. Clara, I wanted to ask you how you chose the 7 themes. Like, tell people what the 7 kind of emotions that you worked through are and why you chose them.
We chose them together, actually.
Okay, great.
But it was a long time ago, so I feel like Steph maybe has forgotten that we created these together. So essentially, kind of what we're working with in terms of the classes, the yoga classes themselves, is we actually, we went through the 7 chakras, and then we dealt with the shadow of each of these chakras. And chakras are essentially intersection lines of energy. We have thousands of chakras in our body, but the ones that yogis generally focus on are the ones that go up, what we call Sushumna, which is the main energy channel that starts from the base of the spine, goes up to the top of the head. If you've ever seen pictures like an illustration of a person seated in meditation, and then these colors, like these balls of light going up, those are the chakras that we generally focus on, one being in the base of the pelvis, the second one being right below the belly button, the third above the belly button, 4th at the heart, 5th at the throat, 6th at the third eye center, and then 7th at the top. And we essentially went through, based on Anna Dea Judith's Eastern Body, Western Mind, a wonderful book that we would highly recommend you read. And essentially she's mixing Eastern thought in terms of these energy lines with Jungian philosophy. And so Carl Jung, if you're unfamiliar with who he was a psychologist, or he was a psychologist. He was a psychologist that was born out of Freud, meaning Freud was his mentor, Sigmund Freud. And he kind of took Freud's theories around psychology, like psychology as we know it today, I would say in the West. Freud is kind of the grandfather of it. Carl Jung I'd say is the father. And he went mystic. And he essentially, I feel like, is the shaman or the shaman of the psychologist in terms of really exploring what we call the psyche or the subconscious or the unconscious. There's a lot of words for that one, what we would call, I think, shadow school. And so Jung, so Anna Dea Judith is mixing psychology with the chakras, and so every place in the chakras has a positive, like something that you can work on in terms of bringing more positivity, and then like what she would call a deficit or a shadow. And so we picked essentially shame, grief, duplicity, illusion, Maya. Hit me up with the rest. Do you remember them?
Fear,
yeah.
Guilt,
attachment. Yeah, and attachment. So those are all the ones that we worked with. And one of the reasons why we also picked these is that they're universal.
Yes.
We all have a relationship with all of these in some way, shape, or form, because it is part of the human condition to experience these, I'll just say experience these.
This is really, I totally forgot that we aligned this around the negative of the chakra. Yeah, I completely forgot that. It's cool that we're going into the chakra series in November.
Yes.
To give all of this is really great. So in November, we're launching the chakra series.
Yes.
I guess I must have known subconsciously.
Sure did.
So the chakra series, we're going to have a month of yoga aligned around each of the chakras that we're experiencing the shadow right now. So that is such a wonderful complement to shadow school.
Yeah. So we're going darkness, and then we're exploring the light. Both are equally important. And with all pieces of darkness, there's a bit of light. And with all pieces of light, there's a bit of darkness. Just think yin yang. That's the way that I always love that. The yin yang sign, which is like the circle that's half black, half white. And there's a dot of the opposite color inside. And so specifically with shadow school, I remember a couple of people in our community were kind of like, you're going really heavy lately in terms of the themes. And I said, I think, we need the darkness in order to really appreciate the light. And also globally, we're in shadow school right now. And I think we should be embracing that and just really, exploring it. So I'm really excited about this month and exploring these emotions, because as Steph, I thought you said so beautifully, it is through the exploration of these of the shadow that we start to change our behavior, and we become more so than before the change is that we become aware of our behavior. And with that, with more awareness of ourselves, or I'll just speak for myself, the more awareness I have myself, the easier it is for me to actually see other people in their totality.
Yes.
Because I find that sometimes, especially when Steph and I were talking extensively about this morning, is that we're in a time right now where we feel very divided as a global community, and we won't necessarily get too much into that, but understanding that seeing the humanity in both sides, I think, is really, really important, because that's how we're going to be able to find common ground. And so if I can understand and appreciate my own shadow, then I can see that in other people, and perhaps have a sense of where whatever intense emotion that's coming at me from this other person, I can see the wound, or understand, or have a sense of that there is something larger happening for this person. And so with that, I feel like creates, at least for me, cultivates more compassion and empathy, which allows me to connect more. And what we need right now, I feel like on a very overt level, is that we need to start remembering the connection that we have with those around us, because it's very easy, I feel like, to draw the line in the sand and say, you're either with me or against me.
Yes to all of that.
There's an and coming.
There's an and. So I'm gonna share a personal story, and then I'm gonna tie this all in. So I recently, within the last week, got into it with someone, and this person and I constantly argue. We see the world very differently. And in the past, in our arguments, we both play the wounded child. We're reacting to each other's emotions. I'm hurt. I'm, dredging up ripples of stuff I've probably carried since I was 3 that I don't know about. This person's doing the same thing. So this week, we're getting into it. And I totally shifted my energy. I listened, not with my like physical ears. I tuned out what he was saying, because he was attacking me verbally, which hurts my feelings. So I was like, you know what? I'm not going to listen to this. I'm just going to listen to your pain. So I wasn't really hearing his words, but I was feeling his energy. And we weren't in person. It was over text messages. So it's easier to turn the person out, granted. So I'm like, But what I heard when I was like, okay, don't go into ego brain, take a step back and just receive this person's pain. It did 2 things. A, it broke our cycle of arguing, because I was not acting based on my emotions. I was very grounded. I was so connected. I was like...
Go, Steph.
Yeah, I felt really good afterwards. I still feel good.
Yeah, I can tell.
I had a big cry.
Good.
But in that moment, I was able to, instead of seeing this person for who I consider them to be,
yes,
all that I saw was their fear.
Yes.
Because I was like, wow, this person is coming at me with so much anger and shame, and just and when I realized none of this is mine.
Yes.
It was very liberating. So based on what you were saying, yes, I had the broader perspective of like who this person is, but mostly I was like, yo, you are all fear right now. You are just one emotion. Like we are a mix of so many elements. My sister the other day was like, Steph, you are in flux all the time. Like if you are hungry, you're going to lash out in a different way than if your belly's full. And in that moment, he was only fear. And as soon as I understood that,
yes,
I started sending him so much compassion.
Yes.
Like love you, like leaving you, like not touching any of this, but like just sending energy to him. Wrap the conversation up elegantly. I felt on my end, I owned it. Yes. I said sorry, but then I took a big step back. So the other side of that is seeing the bigger picture of who they are, but also recognizing in whatever situation with yourself, with your kid, with your partner, like, oh, this person is just acting on pure, they're running with that emotion. It's not really who they are. This is just a flickering moment. And to walk away, like you don't need to go. That was the other thing. I didn't get dragged into it with him. I was like, I need to hold my ground.
Yes.
And then later that day, I had a massive cry. I'm trying to think of what I ate that night to self-soothe. I had something ridiculous. I made myself something. I can't remember what it was.
Yes.
But, because my adrenals were stimulated. That's the other thing is like my whole body later that day. And this is why yoga for me is so good. Because my adrenals, my whole body for hours afterwards was vibrating. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to move with the anger. So I wanted to stay low to the ground. I ate something heavy.
Probably.
To bring me down, because that's again the mania going up. And I was like, no, you need to stay down. I went to bed early. Yeah.
I think this is a good place to end, my friend. That's perfect. So to the humanity in all of us, being able to see and understand ourselves in our totality, the parts of ourselves that we love, the parts of ourselves that we don't love so much. And with that understanding, being able to see that in other people, because again, I think that really allows us to, when we see other people's humanity, then we're able to connect with them. And so, as I always like to say, yoga makes us better. If you're doing the right kind of yoga, meaning the yoga that works for you, you're more kind, more loving, more patient, as Krishnamacharya says. And so, that I think is also the point of self-inquiry slash shadow school reflection, is that it allows us to have more compassion and more empathy for ourselves, and then therefore it ripples out into everybody else. So we hope, like our intention for you in terms of this month and this challenge is to dive into yourself, and that's and to kind of come back over and over again to the themes. That's why we actually specifically picked 7 classes to repeat 3 times or 4 times depending on the week, so that we can kind of come back and be like, and now is there another layer, and now another layer, because as we know, it doesn't end with self-inquiry, and that can be daunting, but it also can be exciting depending on how you look at it. So we're hoping it's exciting for you. Anything you want to add to that before we say goodbye?
And if it's not exciting, that's okay too. That's just moving with whatever you're feeling. That's what I want to add.
Yeah. So we hope you have a beautiful month, and we'll see you on the mat.
Yeah. Thank you, friends.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Steph. And we'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go, and they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more, or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.